There are places that refuse to stay still for long enough to remember them clearly. Beaches are supposed to reset, tide in, tide out, a clean surface every few hours. But most coastlines don't reset, they rewrite. Wanda Beach, on the southern edge of Sydney, is one of those places. And in the summer of 1965, something happened there that the landscape did not erase. Two teenage girls walked into the dunes behind the shoreline. They never came back out. And what followed would become one of Australia's most enduring unsolved cases. You're listening to Criminology Files, the Wanda Beach murders. This is part 1, the shifting dunes. A case defined not only by what was discovered, but by what the environment refused to preserve. Sydney in the mid-1960s was a city in transition. Post-war migration was reshaping suburbs across New South Wales. New families arrived from Britain and Europe, building lives expanding outer districts. It was a period marked by optimism, space, and a different understanding of risk. Children were often given long stretches of independence. Entire afternoons passed without structured supervision. In West Ryde, two 15-year-old girls were part of this ordinary rhythm of suburban life. Marianne Schmidt was described in contemporary accounts as quiet and responsible, closely connected to her family. Christine Sharrock, also 15, was outgoing and energetic. The two girls were close friends, connected through school and daily routine. That summer, a beach trip was arranged involving the family members and younger siblings. It was intended to be simple. A day at the coast. Nothing more. On Monday, the 11th of January, 1965, the group travelled by train from suburban Sydney toward the southern beaches. They carried food, towels, and belongings for a full day by the water. By late morning, they arrived in the Cronulla coastal area, but conditions had already shifted. Strong winds were moving across the shoreline, pushing sand inland in unstable bursts. Swimming conditions were poor, and warning flags were reportedly placed along sections of the beach. Rather than abandon the outing, the group moved north along the coastline towards the more sheltered area near Wanda Beach. Here the landscape changed. Less populated, more exposed, backed by large dunes rather than built structures. They settled near the base of the sandhills. For a time, the day continued normally. Food was eaten, children played near the water when conditions allowed. The older girls supervised the younger children. But the wind did not settle, and the sand itself was no longer fixed to the ground. It was moving. At some point in the afternoon, the group became loosely separated. This kind of movement was common on the beaches at the time. The younger children remained near the dunes. The two teenage girls moved away. What follows is reconstructed from later statements and early police summaries. Accounts differ in detail, but the general sequence is consistent. The girls indicated they were going to retrieve their belongings left earlier near the southern side of the beach. They told the children to remain where they were. Then they walked away. Some accounts suggest they initially moved in the direction of the shoreline, but shortly after they changed direction toward the dunes, away from the beach and into unstable landscape of shifting sand ridges shaped by wind. One younger child reportedly called out when the direction changed. The response, as recorded in later summaries, is inconsistent across accounts. What is consistent is this: the girls did not return. The children waited. At first, it would not have seemed unusual. Beaches are chaotic environments. People move in and out of sight constantly. But as time passed, uncertainty grew. There was no clear return. No visual confirmation of the girls reappearing over the dunes. Eventually, the children made their way back towards the main access points. They collected their belongings they left earlier in the day and returned home. By evening, families realized the girls had not come back. Police were contacted and missing person investigations began. By nightfall, Wanda Beach was no longer a recreational space. It had become a search zone, and the weather conditions continued to change. Search efforts began along the coastline and into the dunes after dark. Conditions were already difficult. The wind that had shaped the afternoon continued into the night, constantly shifting the dunes and reducing visibility. Footprints, if they existed, would not have remained stable for long. By the time the organised search began, much of the surface had already changed. The dunes were not fixed terrain. They were mobile. Search teams moved through the unstable sand. Low visibility and rapidly changing ground conditions. No immediate trace of the missing girls was located that night. The search continued the following day. On the afternoon of the 12th of January 1965, searchers located 2 bodies in a shallow depression within the sandhills, several hundreds of meters inland from the shoreline. They were partially covered by sand. The positioning suggests exposure to wind and environmental movement after death. Police secured the area. However, environmental conditions had already affected the scene. Sand movement over the preceding 24 hours had already altered the surface evidence significantly. No weapons were recovered at the location. No clear footprint sequence survived in the shifting ground, and no suspect was identified at the scene. The investigation entered its earliest and most fragile phase. The investigation expanded rapidly. Hundreds of officers were involved in the early stages of the case. Search grids covered dunes, beaches, and transport routes. Witnesses were interviewed across the region, including surf lifesavers, commuters, residents, and visitors. It became one of the largest homicide investigations in New South Wales at the time. Despite this scale, no single witness account confirmed the suspect. Multiple lines of inquiry were followed and numerous individuals were considered in the broader investigation, but each lead encountered the same limitation: insufficient evidence to proceed. No arrests were made, no charges were laid. Over time, the case transitioned into long-term review and then cold case status. Cold cases are shaped not only by evidence, but by time itself. Memory changes. Environments erase physical traces. And investigative methods evolve, but only within the limits of what remains. In the Wanda Beach case, these pressures converge. In the later decades, forensic review of preserved items reportedly yielded a partial biological material consistent with historical evidence recovery efforts. However, no definitive match has been made publicly confirmed. What remains today is a partial reconstruction. 2 girls, a group of children, a beach, a separation, and an absence that could never be resolved into certainty. Everything beyond that point exists only in fragments. The dunes at Wanda Beach still shift today. The landscape continues to change with every tide and every weather system. Most people walking there now are unaware of what occurred beneath that ground in 1965. But the case remains open in history, unresolved in law, and unanswered in fact. 2 teenage girls entered that landscape on a summer day, and they never returned. The question that remains is not only who did it, but how something so significant could disappear into a place that refuses to stay still. The Wanda Beach Murders, Part 2, The Phantom Suspect. Everyone saw someone, no one saw the killer. Every unsolved murder case creates a strange illusion. People begin to remember a man standing alone, somewhere watching, a conversation that felt unusual, a car parked where it shouldn't have been. Days after a crime, witnesses emerge convinced they saw something important. Weeks later, they're certain. Months later, they disagree with one another. The Wanda Beach investigation would generate hundreds of statements. Some described the same man. Others described completely different people. Every account seemed believable. None could be proven. You're listening to Criminology Files, The Wanda Beach Murders, Part 2, The Phantom Suspect. The discovery at Wanda Beach transformed a missing persons inquiry into one of New South Wales' largest homicide investigations. Hundreds of detectives and uniformed police officers became involved. Thousands of interviews followed. Schools, railway stations, surf clubs, bus depots, holiday parks. Every possible witness was sought. Investigators reconstructed the girls' final known movements minute by minute. Who saw them on the train? Who saw them on the beach? Who saw them entering the dunes? The answer rarely matched. Some witnesses believed the girls had been alone. Others insisted a man had been seen nearby. Still others remembered groups of young men moving across the dunes that afternoon. The investigation expanded faster than the evidence could support. One description appeared repeatedly: a lone man, estimated to be in his 20s or 30s, seen walking through the sandhills. Sometimes he was described as watching people. Sometimes he was described as simply passing through. The clothing changed depending on the witnesses. So did the age. So did the height. Police released appeals asking the public to identify anyone matching the broad descriptions. Names began arriving almost immediately. Dozens, then hundreds. Every lead required investigation. Most disappeared within days. The investigation produced an enormous volume of information: anonymous letters, telephone calls, confessions, people claiming psychic visions, others insisting they knew exactly who was responsible. Detectives were required to assess every significant claim. Many appeared convincing at first. Almost all collapsed under scrutiny. Some suspects had firm alibis. Others simply could not be connected to Wanda Beach. The pattern repeated itself again and again. A promising lead. Intensive investigation. No evidence. Another dead end. Several months after the Wanda Beach murders, another violent attack occurred on a nearby beach. The victim survived. She provided investigators with a description of her attacker. Because of the location and the nature of the assault, detectives considered whether the crimes might be connected. These similarities attracted considerable public attention, but similarities alone cannot establish responsibility. Despite extensive investigation, police never publicly confirmed that both attacks were committed by the same offender. The possibility remained. The proof never arrived. Every unsolved case generates theories. Some suggest a local offender familiar with the dunes. Others urge the killer may have been passing through the area by chance. Some believe there was only one offender. Others have questioned whether more than one person was involved. Each theory attempts to explain the same unanswered questions. How were two teenagers overpowered? Why that location? Why was so little evidence left behind? No theory has answered every question, and none has been established as fact. Over 60 years have passed. Many witnesses are no longer alive. Investigators have retired. Physical evidence has diminished with time. Yet, the file remains open. Somewhere inside thousands of pages, there may be one overlooked detail, one statement, one name, one connection that was impossible to recognize in 1965. Or, perhaps, the person responsible was interviewed and simply walked away unnoticed. In unsolved investigations, certainty becomes harder with every passing year. Memory fades, evidence disappears. The unknown grows larger. The phantom suspect remains that. Not one man, but every man who was considered, and every lead that dissolved before it could become proof. The Wanda Beach Murders, Part 3. The Last Evidence. Some cases are solved by what is found. Others are defined by what time leaves behind. Evidence doesn't disappear all at once. It fades. A footprint becomes softer with every gust of wind. A fingerprint weakens beneath moisture and sunlight. A memory changes every time it is recalled. The human mind fills gaps, often without realizing it. Investigators know this. Time is rarely neutral. It works against certainty. But sometimes, time works in the opposite direction. A fingerprint that meant nothing in 1965 can become valuable decades later. A biological trace too small to analyze may suddenly become identifiable. Technology changes. Questions evolve. Old evidence acquires new meaning. The Wanda Beach murders entered history as one of Australia's greatest unsolved crimes. Yet, the investigation never truly stopped. Behind every anniversary, every newspaper article, every television documentary, the file remained open, waiting. For science, for luck, for one mistake made by someone who believed enough time had already passed. You're listening to Criminology Files, The Wanda Beach Murders, Part 3. The Last Evidence. For more than 6 decades, detectives have revisited the same beach, the same statements, the same fragments of evidence, not because they expect history to change, but because the tools used to examine history have, tonight, the final chapter. When public attention fades, police investigations often become quieter. Not finished, simply quieter. The Wanda Beach murders never reached a conclusion. There was no arrest, no trial, no conviction. Instead, the investigation entered a different phase. The file grew larger, year after year. Statements, maps, crime scene photographs, laboratory reports, interview transcripts, lists of names. Some were crossed out, others remained. Each represented a possibility that could never be completely dismissed. Cold cases occupy a unique place within policing. Unlike active investigations, there are no daily press conferences, no search warrants executed before television cameras, no visible urgency, but inside specialist units, the work continues. Sometimes an investigator notices an inconsistency overlooked decades earlier. Sometimes evidence is reclassified. Sometimes entirely new forensic methods become available. The Wanda Beach file passed through multiple generations of detectives. Many of those who inherited it had not even been born when Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock were killed. They approached the investigation without the assumptions that shaped the original inquiry. That distance could be an advantage. Fresh eyes ask different questions. Not what did investigators think happened, but what can still be proven. Every cold case begins with the same challenge: separate fact from interpretation. Fact: two teenage girls travelled to Wanda Beach on January 11, 1965. They disappeared during the afternoon. Their bodies were located the following day within the dunes. No offender was identified. Everything beyond those foundations becomes progressively more uncertain. Witnesses disagree. Timelines shifted. Descriptions conflicted. Investigators had to determine which details remained consistent and which had changed with time. Because memory is not a recording, it is a reconstruction. In 1965, forensic science looked very different. DNA profiling did not exist. Computer databases did not exist. Crime scene photography relied entirely upon film. Communication between police districts was slower. Evidence storage standards varied. Investigators relied heavily upon observation, interviews, fingerprints, blood typing, fibers, hair comparison, and dental records. Each represented the best available science of its time. But science evolves. Questions once impossible to answer became routine decades later. The challenge is whether enough evidence survives long enough to ask them. For detectives reviewing Wanda Beach years later, that question became central. What had been preserved? What had been lost? Had exhibits remained uncontaminated? Could biological traces still exist? Each preserved item required careful examination: clothing, personal belongings, photographs, laboratory samples, original notes. The answers were mixed. Some evidence had survived remarkably well. Other materials reflected investigative practices common in the 1960s, practices that today would be considered less righteous than modern standards. None of this represented negligence. It reflected the era. Crime scene investigation evolves with knowledge. Investigators cannot use forensic techniques that had not been invented. Perhaps the most significant revolution came decades later: DNA profiling, a technology capable of identifying individuals from microscopic biological material. When introduced, it transformed criminal investigation across the world. Cases once believed impossible to solve suddenly became solvable. Murders decades old, unknown victims, previously unidentified offenders. Cold case units everywhere began reopening files, including Wanda. Detectives examined whether preserved exhibits could undergo modern testing. The process was painstaking. Items had to be assessed for contamination, storage history reviewed, laboratory procedures documented. Even successful testing does not guarantee identification. DNA can degrade. It can become incomplete. It can belong to investigators, medical personnel, or entirely innocent people who have handled the evidence before collection standards changed. The science is powerful, but it remained dependent upon what time has allowed to survive. Each generation of detectives asked significantly different questions. The first generation wanted to know who was on the beach. Later investigators asked, who can be eliminated? Modern investigators ask, can technology establish connections impossible to recognize before? Those are very different approaches. The original investigation generated thousands of witness statements. Many described entirely ordinary observations: a family eating lunch, children playing football, surfers entering the water, couples taking walks through the dunes. Only later, after the murders became known, did those ordinary moments acquire potential significance. One witness remembers a man standing alone. Another described someone sitting in the sand. A third believed a vehicle had been parked nearby. Individually, none proved anything. Collectively, they created an enormous puzzle with missing pieces. Cold case detectives often revisit interviews conducted decades later, not because witnesses were dishonest, but because context changes. An insignificant detail in 1965 may become more meaningful when compared against information discovered years later. Equally, details once considered important may prove impossible to verify. Reinvestigation is not simply reading old notes, it is questioning old assumptions. Investigators also examined whether the Wanda Beach murders shared characteristics with other violent crimes committed in Australia during the same period. Such comparisons are common. Patterns identify repeat offenders, shared methods, geographic preferences, victim selection, but similarities do not necessarily indicate the same offender. Coincidence exists. Human behavior overlaps. Detectives must distinguish possibility from proof. In the Wanda Beach investigation, that distinction remained critical. Several theories attracted public attention over the decades. Some connected the murders to later attacks. Others focused upon individuals who became suspects in unrelated investigations. Each possibility required examination. None ultimately produced significant evidence to resolve the case. The difficulty facing modern investigators is profound. The offender, if still alive, would now be elderly. Many witnesses have died. Memories have faded. Landscapes have changed. Buildings have replaced open ground. Roads have shifted. The beach itself has continued doing what it has always done, moving. Every storm reshapes the dunes. Every season alters the coastline. Nature continued its work long after investigators packed away their equipment. Modern science has answered questions investigators in 1965 could never have imagined asking. But science cannot recover evidence that no longer exists. In the second part of our final episode, we examine the theories that endured, the reasons this case has resisted resolution for more than 60 years, and why Wanda Beach continues to occupy a unique place in Australia's criminal history. Because sometimes the greatest mystery is not who committed the crime, it is how a crime can remain unanswered for generations. The Wanda Beach Murders, Episode 3, The Last Evidence, Part 2. Every unsolved murder creates something investigators can neither arrest nor eliminate. Theory. Theories begin as questions, then become possibilities. Given enough time, they can harden into stories. Some are supported by evidence. Others survive simply because they are repeated often enough. The Wanda Beach murders have generated decades of speculation. Books, newspaper features, television documentaries, late-night conversations, internet forums, each searching for the answer that has remained beyond reach since January 1965. Some theories suggest the offender was local, someone familiar with the dunes, someone who understood how quickly the landscape changed and how easily evidence could disappear. Others argue the opposite, that the offender was passing through, a stranger who entered the area by chance, committed the crime, and disappeared before investigators even knew where to begin looking. Both ideas have been explored. Neither has been proven. Investigators also considered whether the murders could be linked to other violent crimes. When serious offences share broad similarities, location, victim profile, or method, detectives routinely compare them. Sometimes those comparisons reveal the work of a repeat offender. Just as often, they reveal coincidence. Over the decades, names occasionally surfaced in public discussion because individuals were suspected or convicted of other violent crimes. Police examined some of those possibilities where evidence justified doing so. Yet, Examination is not confirmation. No publicly available evidence has been established that any previously identified suspect was responsible for the Wanda Beach murders. The distinction matters. In a case that has remained unsolved for more than 60 years, speculation can easily outlive fact. The investigation has always returned to the same point. There has never been sufficient admissible evidence to identify an offender beyond reasonable doubt. Cold case investigators often describe a difficult balance. Remain open to new ideas without allowing those ideas to become assumptions. Every theory must survive the same test. Can it be supported by evidence? If the answer is no, it remains only a possibility. Not every crime leaves behind the evidence needed for certainty. Investigators sometimes arrive too late. Witnesses look away. Weather intervenes. Chance intervenes. The Wanda Beach investigation encountered many of these challenges at once. The environment itself complicated the search. Strong coastal winds altered dunes. The surface changed continually. Potential footprints, impressions, or other trace evidence could be obscured or erased. By the time the search became a homicide investigation, valuable opportunities to preserve the scene had already been affected by natural conditions. That shaped every stage of the inquiry. Then came time. Years became decades. Technology improved, but time continued removing pieces of the puzzle. Witnesses forgot small details. Some died. Buildings replaced open land. Roads changed. Communities evolved. Even the beach itself shifted. Investigators could revisit the file, but they could never revisit the 11th of January, 1965. That day exists now only in photographs, documents, and fading memories. Modern forensic science has transformed criminal investigations. DNA profiling, digital imaging, advanced trace analysis, genetic genealogy has solved cases once believed impossible. Yet every single scientific breakthrough depends on one simple requirement: evidence. If biological material has degraded beyond analysis, science cannot recreate it. If an object was never collected, technology cannot examine it decades later. Even the most sophisticated laboratory cannot recover what no longer exists. That is one of the hardest truths in a cold case investigation. Science expands possibility. It does not erase history. Wanda Beach is still there. Families still spread towels across the sand. Children still run towards the water carrying surfboards. Dogs chase waves at sunrise. Joggers follow the shoreline before work. Tourists photograph sunsets over the Pacific. Most have no idea that one of Australia's most enduring unsolved murder investigations began beneath these same sand dunes. The landscape appears peaceful, almost unchanged. But places remember differently than people do. People remember through stories. Land remembers through silence. The murders altered more than one investigation. They influenced conversations about public safety, about missing children, about investigative practice, about preserving crime scenes. Many procedures now considered routine developed gradually through lessons learned across countless investigations, including difficult unsolved cases. Every unanswered crime leaves something behind. Sometimes it is evidence, sometimes it is experience. Future investigators inherit both. For the families of Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock, the passing decades could never replace certainty. An arrest never came. A trial never took place. No verdict answered the questions that began on the summer afternoon in 1965. Anniversaries continued to arrive. Birthdays passed. Lives that might have been lived remained imagined rather than experienced. That absence cannot be measured in police files. It exists beyond investigation. Cold cases are often described as dormant, but dormant is not the same as forgotten. Across Australia, specialist investigators continue reviewing unresolved homicides whenever new information or improved technology creates an opportunity. The Wanda Beach murders remains among those cases. Open, active in principle, there are places that refuse to stay long enough to remember them clearly. We begin this story with the dunes, a landscape that shifts with every storm, every tide, every season. A place where yesterday's footprints became today's blank canvas. It seemed at first like the perfect place for history to disappear. But history has a way of remaining, even when evidence does not. The names remain: Marianne Schmidt, Christine Sharrock, two friends, 15 years old, a summer holiday, a walk across the sand. Lives measured not by what they became, but by what questions were left behind. Every investigation begins with certainty. Someone knows what happened. Someone was there. Someone carried the truth away from the beach. For investigators, the challenge has always been reaching that truth before time placed it beyond recovery. In some cases, they succeed. In others, time wins. Perhaps somewhere in an old photograph, an overlooked diary, a forgotten conversation, or a preserved piece of evidence, there is still one final answer waiting to be recognized. History offers no guarantees, only possibilities. The dunes continue to move. The wind continues to erase. The tide continues its endless return. Visitors arrive, children laugh. Surfers paddle into the break. Life continues. Yet, beneath that ordinary landscape, the question remains. Not because investigators have stopped searching, not because the victims were forgotten, but because some mysteries resist every generation that tries to solve them. If the Wanda Beach murders are ever solved, it will not change what happened that January afternoon. It will not return the two young lives to their families. It will not restore the years that followed, but it would do something equally important. It would replace uncertainty with truth. And sometimes, after decades of silence, the truth is the closest thing history can offer to justice. This has been Criminology Files, the Wanda Beach Murders. Thank you for listening. This program is a reconstructed documentary narrative based on publicly available reporting, historical summaries, and retrospective accounts relating to the Wanda Beach case. Where historical sources differ, the script reflects the most commonly cited versions found across public reporting and archival summaries. Certain details originate from witness recollections recorded after the event and may vary between accounts. The case remains officially unsolved. No person has ever been convicted in relation to the events discussed. All individuals referenced are legally presumed innocent unless otherwise stated in official judicial findings. The presentation is intended for historical and educational context only. You've been listening to Criminology Files. Producing these deep dives takes significant time and research. If you find value in our work, please take a moment to subscribe and leave us a review. For case updates and behind-the-scene content, follow us on Instagram at Criminology Files. We'll see you next week. Good night.